They locked me in a sound booth on my own brother's wedding night. Not a single word of credit, not one thank you. While the symphony I poured my soul into, every note written in blood was played under his name. The crowd stood and hailed Ethan as a genius, and me, I stood in the dark, fists bleeding, silenced like invisible help. I didn't scream. I just released the real music online and watched the world wake up. If you think this is just another family story, you're wrong. Subscribe now so you won't miss more twisted storytelling like this. I lost my name in the music I wrote, but what they didn't know was that I still had the original no one had ever heard. They say the purest melodies come from silence, but no one tells you what happens when that silence is pressed into your mouth like a gag disguised as politeness. I'm Elina Park, and for most of my life I've composed music in the shadows of louder names like Ethan, names like Park, but never my own. It was 3 weeks before the wedding, the final movement of my symphony. The family flame was almost done. I'd been writing it for over a year, folding memories into melody, grief into harmony, and everything I couldn't say into silence between notes. I wrote it for Ethan, my older brother, my best friend before we both became strangers in our own home. My studio apartment was filled with tangled sheet music coffee mugs with lipstick stains and the constant hum of my keyboard. I played the last bar again, adjusting a single crescendo, then stopped. My fingers hovered over the keys, heart pulsing in that terrifying space where creation turns to completion. This was it, my gift. I saved the final score under a new folder, titled it simply For Ethan. Not for credit, not for praise, just for him. 2 hours later, I was at my parents' house in Montclair, sitting at the same piano where I learned my first notes. It still smelled faintly of polish and roasted barley tea. The living room hadn't changed in a decade, same pale wallpaper, same stiff floral couch, same unspoken tension held together by decorum. My mother Ji-hyun sat across from me with perfect posture, her hands folded in her lap like origami, delicate but unyielding. She wore the same navy dress she always wore when she needed to receive something, respect, control, or confession. "Elina," she said, "don't forget to turn the sheet music. You always lose tempo in the bridge." I smiled like I always did. The quiet one, the helper, the daughter who listened. "Of course," I said. "I just wanted you to hear it. All of you." Ethan sat near the fireplace, eyes tired but kind. Amelia, his fiancée, curled her legs under her on the couch beside him, a smile tucked behind perfect teeth. She was wearing the engagement ring our grandmother once wore, though no one had mentioned that it used to be promised to me. I didn't say anything. I played instead. The opening notes flowed like breath, simple, warm, familiar. A motif built from our childhood theme, chasing fireflies in the backyard, the smell of Dad's aftershave, Ethan teaching me how to ride a bike. I had stitched our past into something alive. Ethan's eyes welled. Amelia's hand tightened on his wrist. My mother didn't blink. When the final note faded into the stillness, Ethan stood slowly. "That was—" he began, then exhaled, searching for words. "That was home." My mother clapped twice. Polite, controlled. "It's very cinematic," she said. I nodded. I didn't expect applause, but I'd hoped for something more than cinematic. "Is this what you plan to play at the wedding?" Amelia asked, tilting her head. Her tone was careful. Too careful. I hesitated. "Yes, it's the piece I wrote for Ethan. It's the centerpiece." Amelia glanced at my mother. That split-second flicker between them, like 2 pages turning in the same script, told me everything. "Oh, of course," Amelia said quickly. "It's just big, very emotional, maybe even overwhelming for some guests." "I can tone it down," I offered. "Or just do an instrumental excerpt during dinner." No, Ethan said. "It's perfect. It's you." Ji-hyun leaned back. "Elina," she said, adjusting her necklace, You're always so generous with your art. It's your strength. But remember, this event is about Ethan and Amelia. Let's keep it balanced. I froze, my spine stiffened instinctively. I thought it was about family, I said. She smiled. That smile. The one that dismissed your truth without needing a rebuttal. And you're part of that, of course, but your place is to support. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her tone had the precision of a scalpel. Ethan looked away. Amelia reached for a macaron. I looked down at my hands, calloused, ink-stained, tired. Support. Not participate, not lead, not even stand beside. Just support. I stood up, gathering the sheet music. Well, I said I hope it's helpful. Very, my mother said. You always know how to elevate the room. It was meant as a compliment, but it felt like being told I make a good backdrop. As I packed my music, I noticed Amelia whisper something to Ji-hyun. Ji-hyun nodded, barely perceptible. I left before they could ask me to make edits. In the hallway, I lingered by a family portrait, one from when we still smiled with our whole faces. I was 9, Ethan 11. Our dog Lucky had just jumped into my lap, muddy paws and all. My bangs were uneven. Ethan had braces. Ji-hyun stood behind us, hand resting lightly on my shoulder like I was something to be kept still. In that photo, we looked like a family. Now we just looked like people who used to live under the same roof. When I got back to my apartment, I didn't cry. I opened the audio file of the final recording, played it again, just once. It didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt borrowed, like something I had carried across a bridge only to watch someone else claim the view. I lay down on the floor, eyes closed, and listened. Somewhere between the cello swell and the oboe counterpoint, I felt it, that thing I'd never dared name. Not jealousy, not resentment. Erasure, not loudly, not cruelly, but deliberately, silently. A family doesn't have to scream you out of the story. Sometimes they just rewrite it without you. I kept breathing because breathing was all I had left. But the music had stopped being mine the moment they said it was too much. Too emotional, too big, too me. And still, some part of me believed, hoped, prayed that giving them beauty might still earn me a place at the table. I should have known better. But composers are dreamers by nature. And I, like all of them, had composed my dream in a language none of them cared to understand. A few days after the rehearsal at my parents' house, Ethan called. His voice was easy, cheerful, soft-edged, with that familial confidence like nothing between us had ever been cracked. "Hey, Linz," he said, using the childhood nickname only he ever got away with. "Amelia and I were talking. It'd be great to get the final audio and notation files to the conductor by this weekend. The sooner the better, right?" There was no suspicion in his tone. No edge, no guilt. Just warm efficiency, like we were collaborating on a shared dream. I didn't hesitate. "Of course," I said. "I'll clean up the files and send everything tonight." And I did. I exported the master file, flattened the stems, cleaned the tempo markers. I even included alternate versions, one with full orchestra, one chamber-sized one in simplified strings only. I labeled everything meticulously and sent it to the shared drive under a folder called Elina to Ethan. Final. No watermark, no digital signature, just trust. Because that's what I did. I trusted. I didn't hear back. But that wasn't unusual. My family had always been allergic to follow-ups unless something went wrong. I assumed no news meant they were satisfied. 1 week later, I walked into the Belmont Auditorium with a coffee in one hand and my worn satchel of sheet music in the other. I had a badge waiting for me at the front desk, Elina Park guest artist, rehearsal support. I'd never been in this auditorium before. It was grand cathedral-like with carved moldings and a stage polished like obsidian, the kind of space where sound swam, not just traveled. I smiled at the woman at the reception, introduced myself, and asked where the tech booth was. She pointed to a side entrance, just down the corridor, Studio B. Not the main hall, not the conductor's room, Studio B. I didn't question it, not yet. The corridor smelled of fresh varnish and cold metal. I passed 2 violinists in rehearsal blacks, neither of whom looked up. Outside Studio B, a clipboard hung with the rehearsal schedule. I ran my finger down the sheet until I saw the line that made my stomach stall. 11. Sir A.M. Full ensemble. Run through lead conductor. Mason Tolland composer. Elina Park. I read it again and again. The clipboard didn't flinch. Mason Tolland was a name I recognized. He was a former student of my father's. Brash, charismatic, known for his ability to reimagine compositions into something marketable. Composer Elina Park. It was printed, not scribbled, not penciled in. Intentional. I stepped backward as if the wall itself had pushed me. I headed straight toward the stage entrance. But as soon as I reached the glass doors that led to the conductor's booth, someone stepped in front of me. "Hi, sorry, Miss Park." She was young. Clipboard, earpiece. That specific brand of politeness that was secretly laminated in authority. "Yes," I said. "You're scheduled for Studio B?" She smiled. "We have you on deck for tech oversight, lighting and playback verification. They'll need your ears in there." "There's been a mistake," I replied. "I wrote the piece being performed. I'm here to work with the ensemble." She didn't flinch. "I totally understand. But we were instructed to route you to support. All coordination is now going through Mr. Tolland and Mr. Park. If you'd like, I can let Mason know you're here." Let Mason know. Let him know the girl who wrote the music is standing in the hallway like a stagehand. "No," I said quietly. "It's fine." She nodded once relieved and opened the side door. Studio B was small, cold, lined with monitors and dim green lights. It was the kind of room where signals were sent but nothing was ever received. A single tech assistant greeted me with a nod. "We'll patch in the sound feed from the main stage," he said. "You can let us know if any mics clip or balance shifts." I took the seat nearest the screen and stared as the ensemble filtered into view. There it was, my music, my score, held in their hands like it belonged to someone else. I watched as Tolland raised his baton. His face was bright, confident, smug. The music began and immediately I heard it. The changes. He had restructured the tempo. Cut the second theme. Transposed the coda into a triumphant major ending I never wrote. All the breath, all the intimacy, all the aching silences, they were gone. In their place, there was a kind of clean, polished optimism that didn't belong to the piece at all. It was like watching your handwriting mimicked by a stranger. But no one in the room flinched. They played it like it was gospel. I reached for the score on the tech monitor zoomed into the corner. At the top in bold it read, "The Family Flame," by Elina Park. Arranged by Mason Tolland. No mention of me, not even in the footnotes. My name deleted. I swallowed air like it could fill the space being carved out inside my chest. I didn't speak. There was no one to hear me. Instead, I watched. Watched as the violinist bent into a phrase I wrote at 3 a.m. during a thunderstorm. Watched as the cellist played the harmony I once scribbled on a napkin after hearing Ethan laugh on the phone with Dad. Watched as the choir sang a line that used to be a whisper in my head, now amplified under someone else's name. When the movement ended, the camera cut to Ethan. He clapped. He smiled. He said something to Amelia, who stood beside him in the wings. She leaned in, kissed his cheek. I sat there invisible in my own creation. The assistant next to me turned. "Sounds incredible, huh?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. Instead, I stood and left the room without a word. In the hallway, my phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. "Hey! Hope you're loving how it's coming together." Tolland added a few touches, but it's still your spirit, I swear. So proud of this. Thanks again for everything. I stared at the text. I didn't know what part of it was worse, that he called it my spirit, or that he thanked me like I was a hired ghost. I wanted to reply, something sharp, something undeniable. But instead, I locked the screen. I walked to the lobby, told the receptionist I was heading out early. She nodded. "We'll have your badge ready again tomorrow, Miss Park." Tomorrow? No, I wouldn't be back. I walked through the front doors and into the light where the sound of traffic swallowed the silence in my chest. When I got home that night, I opened my laptop and stared at the folder Elina to Ethan. Final. Still there, still unprotected, still pure. And suddenly I felt the urge to rename it. Deleted in silence. I didn't press enter. Instead, I opened the document labeled Composer Notes. And at the bottom where I'd once written, "For Ethan always," I deleted it. I didn't replace it with anything. The space looked better empty. And in that emptiness, for the first time, I heard a new sound. The silence of someone finally realizing she wasn't being overlooked. She was being erased. And maybe, just maybe, she was ready to write something else. Not for them. Not for gratitude. But for herself. For the first time. The ballroom at Carlton Estate shimmered like something from a dream I didn't belong to. Rows of gold-rimmed glassware caught candlelight in delicate flickers. A quartet played softly near the floral arch. The ceiling glowed in a wash of rose gold and pearl like a sunset that had forgotten it needed to end. And me, I stood at the edge of it all, wearing black like every other behind-the-scenes assistant. Hair pinned back, earpiece in, badge around my neck that read Lighting Coordination, Park, Young Wedding. No title, no honorific, just function. I hadn't eaten. I hadn't sat. I'd spent most of the day reviewing power circuits, adjusting uplights, syncing fade cues to match the dinner pacing. Not because they asked me to, because someone had to. Because the person who wrote the symphony for tonight wasn't invited to perform it. 7:05 p.m. My watch buzzed. A short tap on the shoulder from the AV guy confirmed it. "They're starting the show," he said. "Conductor's cued. Go time." I gave a tight nod. From where I stood behind the last row of tables near the utility wall, I could see the stage lights blink on one by one. Soft amber glow. Then blue. Then the slow rising swell of a live orchestra beginning to play my music. No, not my music. Not anymore. Not since they put Ethan's name at the top of the sheet. Not since they assigned me a folding chair near the equipment table next to two guys in cargo pants and headset buzz. The opening chords filled the room, and I felt my breath catch not because it was beautiful, but because it still was. Even stripped, even rearranged, even given away, my music still spoke. It climbed the room like it remembered how I meant it to feel. A quiet fell over the crowd, the kind that only happens when art catches everyone off guard. Guests leaned into one another, glasses lowered, heads tilted. They were listening, and it was breaking me. From the back corner, I watched the conductor rise into the heart of the crescendo, arms wide, strings trembling. The horns surged, the piano struck like memory, and for a moment I could almost feel the first time I wrote that bar at 2:43 a.m. alone in my apartment, trying to capture the moment Ethan hugged me the night Dad died. And now that moment had been stolen and played like a wedding ring slipped onto the wrong hand. The final swell arrived precisely where I always imagined it would, layered, aching, triumphant. And when the silence hit perfect and suspended, the entire room exhaled. Then came the applause. Long, thunderous, rising in waves. "Wow," someone whispered beside me. "He really is a genius." A screen near the stage lit up with a name in calligraphy. Original composition, Elina Park. Arranged by Mason Tolland. My fingers clenched so tight I didn't feel my nails slicing skin. But I saw it. My hand curled at my side, a dot of blood rising like punctuation I didn't agree to. The camera crew swept across the ballroom, panning over the audience, catching smiles and tears. They zoomed in on Ethan, standing, hands over his heart. He looked overwhelmed, like someone who had just been handed a legacy. Ji-hyun leaned over from her seat at the head table. Her voice was soft, but I heard every word carried on the wireless mic she didn't know was still transmitting. Finally, she said with that quiet pride only mothers know how to weaponize, "He's picked up where your father left off." My father? Not ours, not mine. Not the man who taught me to listen to rain as if it were melody. Just his, just Ethan's. I stood still, back pressed to the wall, while my mother's words replayed louder than the music. "He's picked up where your father left off." She didn't say I had. She didn't say we both had. Because I wasn't part of the inheritance. I was just the help. "Elina, can you come check the front wash lights? We've got a flicker on table 12. A voice snapped me back. It was Vanessa, the venue coordinator. Kind, efficient, completely unaware of the irony. I nodded. She didn't wait for a reply. No one ever did. I crossed the ballroom, careful not to draw attention, weaving through heels and linen and toasts mid-whisper. The spotlight flickered once, then again. I adjusted the dimmer from the side panel, resynced the fade with the timeline. Someone nearby clapped me on the shoulder. "You're good at this," a groomsman said. "Lighting techs never get enough credit." I smiled politely, not because I was flattered, but because it was safer than explaining I wasn't the lighting tech. I was the ghost of the music they were dancing to. By 9 p.m., Ethan was halfway through his speech. He stood beneath a floral arch I'd designed the lighting grid for, backlit like a prophet. "I wrote this piece," he said, "because love, like family, needs melody, needs moments of silence and fire together." More applause, more lies. Amelia beamed at him. Her parents teared up. A guest near me whispered, "He's like a poet, but with chords." I bit my lip so hard it hurt. I kept moving, because standing still made me visible. And I'd already learned what that cost. I returned to the AV booth. Vanessa was flipping through her clipboard, checking the timeline for the next lighting shift. "Elina, can you do one more thing?" Of course, I said, always yes, always willing. She pointed to the back of the stage. "The uplight behind the bandstand is too hot. Can you dial it back before the DJ kicks in?" I nodded, grabbed the remote pad, made my way through the narrow corridor behind the curtain. There I paused for just a moment. On the other side of the curtain, a $1,000 celebration played out sparkling wine, curated applause speeches written by PR firms. And here I was behind it, literally. A woman in a headset passed by and stopped. "Are you the tech lead?" I nodded once. She pointed at my badge. "We've got you listed as Director of Technical Flow. Can we rope you into coordinating the floor light cues for the father-daughter dance, too?" I blinked. "Sure, Director of Technical Flow. What a clean way to say the girl who built the scaffolding, but won't ever be shown the spotlight." When the father-daughter dance started, I stood at the far corner of the room, remote in one hand, my other pressed to the earpiece, listening for the cue to fade to amber. Jihyun walked across the room with Ethan. She didn't look at me, and I didn't look at her. Not until the final bar of my music came back reworked as a waltz and played softly beneath their dance. She leaned in and said something to him. He smiled. She laughed. The lights turned gold, and I stood in shadow, dimming the stage I'd built with my bare hands. When the dance ended, the guests cheered, champagne flowed, flashbulbs burst. But in the quiet pocket between song and toast, I heard it. The silence. The silence of not being invited to the table you designed. The silence of watching your name be spoken in someone else's voice. The silence of betrayal dressed in the tuxedo of gratitude. I placed the remote down gently, walked out the side door into the service hallway. The walls were bare. The air smelled of steamed linen and dust. But at least it was honest. At least out here, no one was pretending I was family, and that for once felt like relief. The rain had started without warning. By the time I reached my apartment, my coat was soaked through. My shoes sloshed at every step, and the hem of my dress clung to my calves like accusation. I didn't bother turning on the lights. The apartment was still and dark, lit only by the blinking red eye of the coffee machine I hadn't touched since morning. I dropped my keys onto the floor, not the table, the floor. The sound they made, sharp, metallic, ungraceful, was honest. More honest than anything I'd heard all evening. I walked straight to the piano. Didn't take off my coat, didn't wipe my face. I just sat, wet, shaking, silent. Then I opened the laptop on the bench beside me. I double-clicked the folder labeled Elina, Original. The screen brightened. The audio file lit up. Family Flame, Final Mix Pre-Tolland. I pressed play, and I broke. Not from the melody, but from the memory. Because I had forgotten how much of myself I'd put into that music. Every breath in the woodwinds, every tremble in the second violins. The syncopated piano at minute 2. That was the rhythm of my father's footsteps on the porch. the harp echoing under the cello line. That was my mother's voice from the kitchen, humming a song she swore she never liked, but always sang anyway. This wasn't a composition. It was an autopsy of my childhood. And now, it didn't belong to me. They'd shaved off its imperfections, polished it, rebranded it. They called it Ethan's masterpiece. But this was the real piece. And for the first time since I handed it over, I didn't feel sad. I felt rage. Real physical rage. Not the kind that comes in screams, but the kind that settles behind your rib cage and slowly reconfigures your bones. The kind that demands you build something with it. So I did. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, stood up, and turned every lamp in the room on. Then I pulled the dusty condenser mic from the closet, plugged in the interface, laid the raw files back into my DAW. It was 1:04 a.m. By 1:06 I was recording again. I didn't start from scratch. I didn't need to. The bones were all there. The truth was already living inside the notes. But this time I didn't try to make it presentable. I didn't smooth the cello track where it dipped too raw or retime the piano's final hesitation. I let it breathe, let it ache. I played every instrument I could, piano, synth, violin, even my old clarinet from high school. For what I couldn't play live, I turned to AI-assisted patches and strings, fed it my phrasing, my articulation, my breath work. No flashy plugins, no corporate mixdown. Just me. In my apartment. At 2:47 a.m. reanimating a piece they'd buried under someone else's name. And when I finished, when the final chord faded, and I let silence take its rightful place again, I sat back and cried. Not because I was sad, because I was done letting them use my silence as permission. At 3:14 a.m., I opened a new browser tab and created a fresh account. No profile photo, no bio, no link to me. Just a name. The Nameless Virtuoso. The Unknown Female Musician. In my father's words, the name he used to call me whenever I'd play without telling him. It started as a joke when I was 12. I'd sneak downstairs and play Debussy until he'd call out from his bedroom, "Who is this mysterious genius playing in the dark? Reveal yourself, nameless virtuoso." Now it wasn't a joke. Now it was my armor. I uploaded the track to SoundCloud first, just the music, no hashtags, no metadata. Then I added it to a new YouTube channel, black thumbnail, white serif text family flame, original uncut recording. I didn't tag anyone, didn't post it to my socials, didn't even share it with friends. I wanted it to find its way on its own, like I had to. The only thing I wrote in the description was one sentence: they took the credit. Let the music decide who wrote it. I hit publish at 3:41 a.m. Then I closed the laptop, sat back in the chair, exhaled. The rain was still falling outside, heavy now, rhythmic, a lullaby for the forgotten. But I didn't go to sleep. I stayed up eyes wide in the dark, breathing in the stillness like oxygen. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't waiting for anyone to name me. I had named myself. By the time the sun broke through the blinds, I was no longer just the sister. No longer the support staff. No longer the background music to a celebration I wasn't part of. I was a composer, an artist, a ghost they thought they could silence. And I was done waiting to be invited back in. Let them clap for the version they choreographed. Let them toast Ethan's vision. Let them quote lyrics he didn't write, hum melodies he never heard alone in the dark. I would not fight them in public. I would haunt them in truth. And the truth had a melody. And it had my name buried in a pseudonym, yes, but pulsing in every bar. The Nameless Virtuoso. No family, no face, no permission. Just music that didn't ask to be believed, only heard. And now finally it was. It started slowly. A quiet whisper on a niche music forum, then a repost by a small conductor in Prague, then TikTok. Someone had laid my track, the original uncut bleeding version, beneath a video of their grandfather watching his wedding video from 1953. He wept. The comments flooded in. What is this music? It feels like home. Who wrote this? The uploader didn't know. He'd found it through a friend who found it on a thread who'd stumbled on it from a YouTube rabbit hole. 3 weeks after I hit publish, the piece had 2.1 million views. And no one knew who I was. That was the point. That was the shield. That was the danger. because now it had a life. And life attracts scavengers. One morning, I opened Instagram and saw a clip from a daytime talk show, Good Morning Collective, the kind of program that made viral things go corporate. The host, grinning too wide, looked into the camera. Everyone's talking about this breathtaking piece from the Park Young Wedding Family Flame. It's been making rounds online in various forms. But guess what? The composer is with us today. The crowd clapped. Ethan stepped onto the stage. Polished suit, clean shave, that same gentle charisma that used to help him talk his way out of math tests and late rent. He sat down. The host leaned in. Ethan, this piece is incredible, emotional. Where did it come from? Ethan smiled, humble. Well, music was always a thing in our house. Dad was a conductor. I grew up around symphonies, motifs, leitmotifs. So when it came time to get married, I wanted something personal, something rooted in legacy. So you composed it yourself? A small pause. Yeah, Ethan said. I mean, I had help structuring it, worked with an arranger, but the emotional core, that was me. It came from real life. I stopped the video. Not because I couldn't watch, because I'd heard this lie before, just never televised. It wasn't the first time he'd borrowed my voice. It was just the first time he got paid for it. I opened the Dropbox folder we shared from 3 months ago. The original file used to be there, my composition titled Family Flame, Full Arrangement EP Final. Gone. In its place, Family Flame, Draft 2, by EP and MT signed. I clicked on the file info. Metadata scrubbed, new creation date, new author tag. The digital signature that once said Elina Park now read Ethan.official. He hadn't just renamed the file, he had rewritten the history of it. I went still. Not angry, not broken, just quiet. The kind of quiet you reach right before everything turns sharp. I clicked open my local drive. The original still lived on my desktop. With timestamps, with embedded notes, with every breadcrumb of creation I'd left in my process. It was time to gather proof. I opened my texts with Ethan, searched score, scrolled back. There it was 3 months ago. Hey Lynn, send over that gorgeous second movement when you can. Want Amelia to hear it. 2 days later, got it, you're a genius. Then, can you include the high-res file too? They need print-ready versions for the string section. Each message a nail, each timestamp a hammer. I took screenshots, labeled them, stored them in a private folder, undeniable. Next, I opened the raw project files, the Logic sessions. Not just the exported audio, the actual composition files. One by one, I reopened every session, made sure autosave logs were intact. There were over 40 of them, each with a timestamp. Each with MIDI data tied to my laptop's hardware ID. Then the big one. The email from Mason Tollin 2 months ago. Hey Elina, incredible work on this. Let me know if you're okay with me adjusting some of the phrasing before final review. Ethan said you were on board. Want to make sure. I never replied to that message. Never gave permission. The silence in that thread wasn't compliance. It was theft. I opened my voice memos. Dozens of scratch recordings, me humming themes, me playing partial harmonies on the piano, me sighing between takes, whispering things like, that's too heavy, or try it again softer. Proof not just of authorship, proof of intention. Then came the hardest part. I reached out to the original studio team, the ones we hired during early drafts before the conductor swap. I emailed Lena, the second violinist. I wrote, Hi Lena, you may remember me, Elina Park. I composed a piece we rehearsed back in March at Westburn Studios. I know you're busy, but I'm trying to clarify the timeline and would appreciate any confirmation of the original sessions and who was credited. No drama, just accuracy. Gratefully, E. 10 minutes later, she replied, Of course I remember. You wrote it. That second movement was the most intuitive phrasing I've ever played. I even asked if there was sheet music I could keep. I was told it was being absorbed into someone else's arrangement. Didn't sit right with me. What do you need? I stared at her message, not because I was surprised, Because I realized for the first time I wasn't the only one who noticed. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was an operation. Quiet, clean, professional, and calculated. I emailed 2 more musicians. The harpist, the cellist. Same thing. Same pattern. They knew. They remembered. They just hadn't known I didn't consent. By midnight, I had a folder full of digital evidence audio sketches, rehearsal logs, emails, text chains, and a 30-second clip of me playing the theme that would later be Ethan's legacy. And in that moment, I didn't feel powerless. I felt loaded, like a violin strung too tight, like a match waiting to meet breath. They had erased me. Now I would write myself back in, not by screaming, by documenting, by letting the truth hum at the exact pitch of their deception. Because when people forget how you bled, you make them remember how the stain looked. And I wasn't done bleeding yet. The tea shop was quiet. Soft jazz murmured in the background, competing with the distant rattle of a rain gutter just outside the fogged window. The kind of place where people came to escape noise, not confront it. I'd chosen it for that reason. My mother arrived 7 minutes late. Punctual enough to appear respectful, late enough to assert control. She wore a burgundy coat and her favorite pearl earrings, the ones she always put on when appearances mattered more than connection. Elina, she said, as if greeting a client. I stood, kissed her cheek out of muscle memory, and gestured to the booth I'd reserved. The waiter came by. I ordered chamomile. She asked for oolong no sugar. There was no small talk. There never was not when she felt something approaching. After the tea arrived and she blew across the surface, I finally said it. I need to talk to you about the music. She didn't look up. The wedding, she said lightly. It was beautiful. I didn't write it for them to take. Still, she didn't raise her gaze. She adjusted the sleeve of her coat instead. I know you feel excluded, she said, but that's not what this is about. My throat tightened. Then what is it about? Now she met my eyes. Calm, precise, cutting. It's about protecting what matters. I blinked. Protecting Ethan. Protecting our name, she said. There it was. That old invisible wall, built from legacy and shame. The park name. The conductor father. The golden son. The obedient daughter who could hold a note but not a microphone. You knew what they did, I said. You saw the program. You knew it wasn't his. He made it his, she replied. He made it acceptable, palatable. I stared. You don't think my version was palatable? She sighed. Your version was heartfelt, but this wasn't a eulogy. It was a wedding. I wanted to throw the teacup across the table. Instead, I asked, so what am I to this family? A ghostwriter. A technician. She didn't answer right away. Elina, she said finally, you're talented, but you've always been sensitive. And this family can't afford sensitivities. Not right now. Ethan is building something. Visibility matters. And my integrity doesn't put your name on foundation grants. It doesn't save you when someone asks, what did your son contribute? I felt it then. Not anger. Grief. Grief for the girl I used to be, the one who thought creating something beautiful would earn love. I'm not asking you to choose sides, I said. I'm asking you to tell the truth. She looked away, watching the steam from her cup curl and vanish. Truth, she said quietly, is just another form of performance. Some of us don't have the luxury of staging it. We didn't speak again. She finished her tea, checked her phone, and rose. As she reached for her purse, she added, just don't make this about you. It wasn't your moment. I didn't walk her out. I didn't say goodbye. I sat there breathing, letting her words steep in silence like the leaves sinking to the bottom of my untouched cup. 2 days later, I received an email from someone named Juno Rai, a junior editor at Pulse and Measure, a niche digital publication for emerging composers and music tech reviews. Subject line: Hi, are you the nameless virtuoso? The email was short, kind, curious. She'd heard my track. Heard the wedding version, too. She'd noticed the uncanny similarities. She'd even aligned both tracks on audio software to show how the harmonic structures, cadences, and dynamics matched bar for bar, save for the forced key change in the public version. She didn't accuse. She asked, Would I be willing to comment? Not confirm, not expose. Just comment. I stared at the message for a long time. The cursor blinking below her words felt like a breath being held. I closed the laptop. Not yet. Not because I wasn't ready to speak. Because I wasn't ready for the noise. That evening, I packed my satchel with a single page of printed manuscript. No folder, no protective sheet, just the page. The original handwritten sketch of the second movement's first 32 bars. The part my father once said felt like what dawn might sound like if it cried. I hadn't shown it to anyone since the week he died. I folded the page and headed toward the cemetery. The air was thick with late spring humidity. A storm hovered but hadn't yet begun. The sky was dim and waiting. The cemetery was empty. I passed the newer graves, first marble-polished names still echoing in the living world. Then the older stones' names, half-worn flowers, fake memories half gone. My father's headstone stood at the edge of the slope. Simple. Black granite. Etched with a treble clef beneath his name. Min J. Park. Conductor. Mentor. Father. 1948. 2019. To live in music is to live in truth. I knelt. The ground was dry. The wind didn't move. I unfolded the page and placed it on the stone, weighted it with a small rock. Then I whispered, "They took it, Appa." My voice didn't crack. It didn't need to. They gave it to Ethan. They said it was better that way. For the name, for the image. I traced the edge of the paper. But you knew. You always knew who wrote the harmony in this house, who listened before speaking, who stayed in the wings while the orchestra warmed up. The breeze stirred. I smiled softly. I don't need them to say it anymore. I tapped the page once. You know who wrote it. A single raindrop landed on the corner of the paper. Then another. I stood, left the sheet there unprotected. Because some things are stronger when they're vulnerable. As I turned back toward the cemetery gate, I didn't feel vindicated. I felt seen by one man who no longer had breath to speak. But who gave me mine in the first place? The Golden Baton Awards were held at the Concord Hall, an old concert venue that reeked of prestige and polish. Velvet seats, sculpted ceilings. That heavy hush in the air that tells you the evening isn't for celebration but for performance. And I had a badge around my neck that read Technical Program Liaison, Stage Rear. It meant I could be in the room, but not seen. The theater was packed. Camera crews hovered like bees. Ushers darted with quiet urgency. My headset crackled with the voice of someone coordinating spotlight cues. Ethan's name was on the program printed on heavy cardstock with metallic trim. Nominee Ethan Park, Family Flame Wedding Commission. I stood backstage, just left of the projection booth, invisible in black. He was somewhere out front, seated with Amelia, smiling for the press. I hadn't seen him in person since the wedding. Didn't need to. His face had been everywhere lately. Interviews, podcasts. The young romantic genius who bridged classical emotion with modern elegance. The story had been sold and bought, and now they were handing him a crown made of my ribs. I checked the time, 7:58 p.m. He was slated for the third award. I opened the black case under my arm. Inside a flash drive. Not just any drive. This one carried a preloaded 5-second title screen. It had been approved for another nominee's video, someone who dropped out last minute. I had worked with the AV lead to replace the file in the system an hour ago. They didn't ask questions. I didn't offer answers. I waited. The presenter walked on stage. Spotlight tracked him. And now the nominees for Best Contemporary Composition Short Form. The montage began. Clips of orchestras. Wide sweeps of black tie audiences. Floating strings. And then Ethan. A soft piano intro. A pan over his smiling face. Footage from the wedding licensed from the estate. He sat straighter in his chair. And the golden baton goes to... Pause. Envelope. Breath. Ethan Park. Family Flame. Applause. Louder than anything I'd ever received in that family. He rose, smiled, kissed Amelia, buttoned his jacket, approached the steps. As his foot hit the stage, the screen behind him flickered. The lights dimmed. The projector programmed to cue his official thank you montage played something else. A black screen, white text, quiet at first, then bold. Real music doesn't need a stolen name. NNCVD gasps rose from the crowd like a wave. Ethan froze. The screen held for 3 more seconds, long enough for every phone in the room to snap a photo. Then it blinked out. The lights stuttered. The silence cracked open. Someone in the audience murmured, "What was that?" Another voice, "That's from the wedding track." Whispers, questions, camera shutters. Ethan stood in the center of it all, spotlight too bright now, applause awkward and clipped. The presenter looked confused. Mr. Park, he stepped up to the mic, cleared his throat. I don't know what that was," he said too quickly. "Must have been a tech, error." But it was too late. The room had already shifted. I watched from behind the curtain. His voice was shaking. He thanked the Academy, thanked Amelia, thanked the arranger team, but not once did he say me. I didn't expect him to. The damage wasn't in what he said. It was in what he couldn't stop people from thinking. A journalist near the front row was already typing on her phone. Another was pointing to the AV booth, whispering to an assistant. Ethan's name was being unpeeled in real time like a sticker soaked in water. I didn't stay to watch him finish. I walked through the back hallway, past the rigging crew, past the emergency exit I'd mapped out hours ago. I stepped outside. The night air hit my face like water. The sound of the crowd dulled behind concrete walls and velvet curtains. I kept walking. No one stopped me. No one even saw me. And for the first time in a long, long while, I felt free. Not triumphant, not vindicated, but free. The kind of freedom that doesn't roar. It hums, it lingers, it tells you you did not need their permission to exist. I crossed the alley behind the venue, found the rental car I'd parked 3 blocks down, slid into the driver's seat. I didn't start the engine. I just sat, hands on the wheel, breathing. Outside, sirens passed. A trash truck clanged somewhere in the distance. The city kept moving. And me? I sat still, because I didn't need to run anymore. The projection had said enough. They would ask questions. They would speculate. They would eventually know. But even if they didn't, I had already spoken. On my own terms. Not through press releases, not through public confrontation. Just truth, sharp, unapologetic, unfolded in light across a wall of applause. For so long I thought justice had to be loud, that it needed to stand center stage with fists raised. But sometimes justice is a whisper that cuts deeper than a scream. Sometimes it's a name no one can pin down, because it never needed to be known to be remembered. By morning, the internet was already on fire. A blurry phone video from the Golden Baton stage capturing the 5-second flash of text had gone viral. On Twitter, someone slowed it down and overlaid the wedding version of Family Flame with the anonymous track from the nameless virtuoso. The harmony aligned like ghost and shadow. The caption read, "So, Ethan Park is a fraud." The post had 47,000 shares in 6 hours. Then came the duets. A composer in Berlin broke down the score in real time bar by bar, proving the original and the award-nominated version were 92% identical. A conductor from Melbourne called it the most elegant plagiarism I've ever seen. A Juilliard professor quietly retweeted without comment. But the loudest voices were from those who'd lived it. Musicians, stagehands, technicians. People who knew what it meant to build something beautiful and be thanked with silence. By nightfall, hashtags were trending. Nameless, virtuoso, who wrote Family Flame, Elina Park. Except I hadn't confirmed it. I hadn't said a word. And that made it worse for them. Because truth left unclaimed makes people dig harder. At 10:40 p.m., a journalist named Rowan Choi published a 7,000-word article on Medium titled "The Real Composer, A Timeline of Disappearance." It was brutal, clinical, verified. He embedded screenshots, audio waveforms with matching fingerprints, time-stamped emails from Dropbox metadata overlays, and a side-by-side of the original and Ethan's final submission. He ended the article with one sentence: "The only thing louder than truth is the silence that tries to bury it." By midnight, Pulse and Measure, The Classical Lens, and even Rolling Stone had picked it up. It was no longer a whisper. It was thunder. Ethan issued a statement the next day, or rather his publicist did. It used words like miscommunication, collaborative process, and unintended oversight. It didn't use my name. At noon, the Golden Baton Committee released theirs: an apology to the public, a rescinding of the award, and an official note that the composition in question had been retracted pending authorship dispute resolution. Then came Amelia's post. A single Instagram story. White background, black text. Sometimes people lie so quietly they believe it's still truth. Wedding postponed indefinitely. She never said his name. She didn't have to. Within 24 hours, sponsors pulled out of Ethan's planned legacy tour. A publisher withdrew a pending book deal. A music school canceled a guest lecture. And my family? They went silent. No calls, no messages. Even Ji-hyun, who once sent me daily check-ins about vitamins and posture, vanished. But not everyone disappeared. An email came in from Lena, the violinist I'd played with in rehearsal months ago. Subject: now they know. Inside was a link to a podcast. Not just any podcast. A quiet underground show called Ink and Sound, hosted by a woman known only as V. Each week, she interviewed anonymous artists who'd had their work co-opted, erased, or buried. I listened to the most recent episode. The title: The Flame They Tried to Steal. I listened twice before agreeing to be on the next one. I didn't give my name, didn't show my face, just my voice, steady low the way it sounded when I was alone. V asked, "How does it feel now that the truth is out?" And I said, "It doesn't feel like victory. It feels like oxygen." For a long time, I thought the only way to be respected was to be recognized, to be credited, to be called out by name. But now, I don't need them to say my name. The music remembers me. "That's enough!" Silence followed. V didn't interrupt. And for once, I let it sit there unfilled, uninterrupted, and real. The episode went live 2 days later. It didn't trend. It wasn't clipped into sound bites or ripped into TikToks. It just existed like a quiet, unlit room that people had to find their way into. But those who found it, they stayed. My inbox filled with messages. Composers, dancers, women who'd written software only for their names to be scrubbed in final launch. Designers whose sketches were turned into billion-dollar brands while they stood behind the camera. One woman wrote, "I thought I was the only one who left her own wedding in silence. Turns out I just wasn't the first to do it with music." Another wrote, "I named my daughter after the nameless virtuoso. Not because I didn't want her to have an identity, but because I wanted her to know she didn't need permission to exist." I cried that night, not because I was hurt, but because the silence had finally turned into something else, a frequency that others could hear. Not all stories need to scream. Some truths slip in like a bow across strings, quiet, certain, unforgettable. And this was mine. The first message came from someone named Josiah Lee. He was 22, studying composition in Singapore, and he said he'd listened to The Flame They Tried to Steal every night for a week. "I want to be brave in the same way he wrote." That was the first message. Then came the second from Anya in Warsaw, who'd been discredited in a school performance because her teacher couldn't believe a girl wrote a movement that complex. Then the third, the fourth, and the 50th. Some from students, some from women twice my age, some from men who admitted they once stole credit, but hearing my story made them stop mid-project and return the work to its rightful owner. The inbox became a choir, and for the first time the sound didn't scare me. It made me sit straighter. It made me stay in the room longer. It made me answer. At 57 minutes into this version of my life, the labels came calling. Big ones, old names with gold logos. They used words like independent vision, genre-breaking, and urgent female voice. They offered budgets, studios, distribution across all platforms. One even offered a full orchestral residency in Vienna with a guaranteed premiere in 2 years. But every proposal came with a caveat, a branding package, a lookbook, an image consultant who would shape Elina Park for modern visibility. and I'd stare at the deck they sent with soft pinks and piano silhouettes and feel my breath get smaller, not because I wasn't grateful, but because I already knew what it meant to hand over the melody of your identity to someone else's design. So I said no to all of them. Not with fire, not with anger, just a quiet email. Thank you for your belief in my music. I am still discovering what it means to hear myself fully. I'd like to finish listening first. And I did. Around the 60-minute mark, a letter arrived. It wasn't emailed. It wasn't typed. It came by post, sealed with wax. My name written in my mother's hand. A handwriting I hadn't seen since she used to label my lunchbox with music note stickers and napkin hearts. The paper smelled faintly of sandalwood and ink. It began, "My daughter Elina, I don't ask you to forgive me. I only ask you to hear me." It went on for 6 pages. She spoke of her fear, her shame, her belief that by protecting Ethan, she was honoring her late husband's legacy, even if it meant mutilating mine. She wrote, "I thought pride would keep us upright, but I see now it only hollowed us out." She ended with, "If you never reply, I understand. But I hope one day you'll play something that sounds like forgiveness, even if it isn't named after me." I didn't reply. I didn't write. I didn't call. But I kept the letter. I placed it under the amber light on my studio desk next to the metronome I'd used as a child. It didn't tick anymore, but it looked like memory. It looked like both a wound and the hand that once dressed it. And that was enough. At minute 62, I launched something new. Not a record, not a concert, not a debut, a space, a name, a structure made not from chords but from intention. It was called Composer's Shadow, an organization for artists whose names had been erased from their own legacies. We didn't offer fame. We didn't promise justice. We offered proof, a space to keep the files, to archive the drafts, to scan notebooks, voice memos, rehearsal footage, and metadata into a digital vault with legal counsel attached. It was quiet work, and it grew fast. The first applicant was a songwriter from Brazil whose father signed her name off a soundtrack for tax reasons. The second was a queer sound designer in Mumbai who wasn't allowed to list her real name in the credits of a Bollywood production. The third was a ghostwriter for a DJ in New York who hadn't received a dime despite writing 7 of his hits. None of them needed applause. They needed restoration. And Composer's Shadow became a lighthouse. Not one that shouted. One that glowed without asking permission. I composed again, of course. Not under pressure. Not for names. Just because the silence changed shape. I wrote a new piece, 3 movements. The first inheritance. The second erasure. The third light through scar tissue. It didn't sound like victory. It didn't sound like vengeance. It sounded like someone remembering what it feels like to take up space and not apologize. And maybe one day I'll premiere it, or maybe I'll never publish it. But either way it exists, and this time I have the proof. This time I own the silence that surrounds it. And this time when people ask, "How did you heal?" I'll answer by turning every cut into an opening and letting the music walk through. The envelope was cream-colored with thick gold trim and the seal of the International Young Women Composers Conference pressed into its corner. Inside a card, heavy, embossed. And it said only this: "We invite you, Elina Park, to close the 3rd night of our program as our final keynote speaker." Not anonymous, not masked, not codenamed. Just me. The silence in my apartment swallowed the moment, but this time it didn't feel like isolation. It felt like breath. 3 weeks later, I was flown to Vienna. The air in that city is cold in the early spring, but it sharpens the mind like crystal. I'd never stayed in a hotel that gave me fresh lilacs each morning. I didn't even know I liked lilacs. Turns out I do. The conference was hosted in the same theater Ethan had once performed in years ago during his first European tour. I remember the photos Mother mailed to every relative. In one, he stood beneath the theater's chandeliers, chin tilted like royalty. The caption below read, "Our family's first star." I stood under that same chandelier. But this time there was no caption, only my reflection in the polished marble floor. And the name badge over my chest, Elina Park. Composer, soul. The third night was the final night. 800 guests, musicians, critics, industry leaders, students, mentors, strangers. I stood behind the curtain in a long navy dress, hair half-pinned, fingers wrapped around a clicker for the slides I'd prepared. Behind me, projected on the screen at 20 feet tall, the program displayed the name of the session. The Flame They Tried to Steal, the Elina Park story. I didn't write that title, but I didn't object either, because now the story wasn't theirs to name. It was mine to tell. At 65 minutes, the host introduced me, a woman in her 30s with fire orange glasses and a voice like silk. She said, "Our next speaker needs no introduction." But more importantly, she finally gets to have one in her own name. The applause was long, steady. When I stepped into the light, it was blinding. But I didn't flinch. Not this time. Because this time, the light wasn't a spotlight someone else directed. It was mine. I adjusted the mic. I looked at the sea of faces, many young men watching with wide-open, wounded eyes. And I began. I was born into a house that was loud, I said. Not just in noise, but in expectation. The laughter was gentle understanding. I told them about my father, how he made silence feel like sin. I told them about my mother, how she confused love with reputation. I told them about my brother, how his shadow grew so large I started composing inside it just to find space to breathe. But I didn't name them with venom. I didn't turn pain into spectacle. I only shared how long it took to realize that when you write music, the first person who must hear it is you. I clicked through the slides, the notebook scribbles, the email timestamp of the original file, the performance at the wedding, the online post, the phrase that had lit a fire across the world: real music doesn't need a stolen name. I paused then, not for drama, but because I wanted the silence to echo, to matter, to hold. I used to think I said that truth needed volume, that if you wanted the world to believe you, you had to shout. I looked at them all. No one heard me when I did. Not my family, not the press, not the people clapping for someone else. But the day I stopped yelling and started creating again for no one's agenda but my own was the day the world finally leaned in. I held up a handwritten score, The Flame They Tried to Steal, my version, printed, signed, dated. And I said, "This is the original. A beat. And I'm the original too." At 69 minutes and 50 seconds into that evening, the lights dimmed and rose again as I closed my laptop. I didn't bow. I didn't cry. I just stepped back. And in that moment, the entire audience stood. All of them. Not because of spectacle, but because they saw me. Really saw me. Not the assistant. Not the tech girl. Not the whisper in someone else's bio. Me. Elina Park. And for the first time, no one else spoke for me. No one corrected the pronunciation of my name. No one added sister of Ethan. No one said background. They just said, "Elina," over and over. And I smiled. Not because I needed the claps, but because they were clapping for the right person in the right story at last. The studio smelled like dust and wood polish and something older than both stillness. No stage lights, no interviews, no applause. Just the hush of a room built to listen. Elina walked in without taking off her coat. The spring wind was still in her hair, but her fingers already itched for something colder, something real. The manuscript, the original one, the real one, rested in her hands. Not the digital file, not the polished printed copy. The one with crossouts, ink smudges, coffee rings. The one she wrote at 2 a.m. on a January night, weeping into silence because no one else had stayed to hear it. She stepped across the floor and placed it on the stand. She didn't bind it. She didn't protect it behind glass. She didn't submit it to any gallery. She clipped it onto the frame like someone pinning up a photograph of someone they once loved and finally forgave. No plaque, no title, no price. Just a song resting where it belonged, for no one's eyes. And everyone's. 2 days later, an envelope arrived in her mailbox. Small, handwritten. No return address except for a name, Sophia, age 11, Busan. Inside was a letter on pale green paper. "Dear Ms. Elina Park, I heard your music on my tablet, the one they call the one with the fire. I listened 5 times. My grandma said not to cry, but I did. It felt like someone saw me. I didn't know music could say things you don't have words for. I want to write songs now too. I don't know where to begin. But I think it starts with wanting to. If you ever have time, can you tell me what to do when people don't believe you can be a composer? Because I want to be one, like you. Love, Sophia. Elina folded the letter tight, then opened it again, then pressed it flat and walked across the room to her desk. Not the glossy one where she took interviews. The other one, the narrow one near the window. She laid the letter under her desk lamp. And then she reached for the thinnest sheet of rice paper and the oldest pencil she still owned, the one her father gave her when she was 7. At the top of the sheet, she wrote, "Music doesn't need to be believed in to have a soul. It just needs to be written." And beneath it, "Dear Sophia, start here. Start now. Start even if no one claps. Your music will find those who are ready to hear it." Later that evening, when the sky had melted into bruised blue and purple, Elina sat at the piano for the first time in nearly a year. Not to rehearse, not to record, not to refine, just to listen to her hands again. She laid her fingers on the keys but didn't press. Not yet. She looked around the room. The shelf of old programs no longer on display. The awards turned backward, the one candle flickering next to her father's old metronome. And then she played. One note, then another, a hesitant third. She wasn't writing for anyone. She wasn't proving anything. She wasn't surviving anymore. She was composing. A melody crept into her hands like it had been waiting in the walls. It wasn't fire this time. It was light. Warm, slow, tender. No crescendos, no declarations. Just the sound of someone coming home to herself. She never released that piece. Never titled it. Never showed it to anyone, but every year on her birthday she played it once, in the dark, with no recording, because some songs, like some parts of ourselves, aren't meant to be known by name. They're meant to be remembered by feeling. And the feeling was this: she no longer needed their applause to echo, because her silence now had a voice, and it sang.